Hello everybody, welcome to our latest webinar. This one is called NEC for FM. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. My furthest right is Chris Moriarty, Head of Insight and Corporate Affairs at BIFM. Also John Bowen, immediate past chair of the BIFM Procurement Special Interest Group. I'm Robert Gerard, NEC Users Group Secretary. Our programme for today starts with Chris. Chris is going to give us an introduction from a BIFM perspective. I will then introduce NEC, give a little bit of background as to what the NEC contracts are. This will then pass to John, who will tell us about BIFM's practice guide on procurement that John's heavily involved with. Passes back to me to talk about NEC for FM for some specifics of NEC in respect of FM. And finally, the three of us form a panel to pick up any questions that you may have raised. If you do have a question, please use the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll answer as many as we can during the session or right at the end. Okay, if I can pass to Chris first of all.
Thank you very much. So hello to everyone tuning in. I guess for us, in terms of setting a little bit of context where FM is, and how we're sort of approaching those challenges. Contract management and procurement seems to be at the heart of a number of the challenges and the conversations that we have within FM, and that's regardless of private sector, public sector, whatever sector we're talking about. It seems to be that there seems to be at the very heart of it conversations around that relationship, contract management and procurement processes. So things like cost versus values is a huge thing for us, and FM seems to be squeezed an awful lot. There seems to be a lot of focus on reducing costs without really considering what impact services are making and attaching the value to that. So there's a big conversation there. Partnerships is a huge thing. We conducted some research earlier on in the year. We called it the FM and the Trust Dividend, and it was looking at the relationships between clients and suppliers. And there's some really concerning things that came out of that. You know, people weren't willing to talk about these things, these relationships, trusting relationships. They sort of at best describe them as acceptable. And underneath a lot of that were things around real-time data, the way that the contracts were devised, and so on. So we found that was really holding people back, making some really significant improvements to not just that relationship, but the organisation that's procuring those FM services, the whole point of the process. So we still found that, but we're still, I guess, you know, and I've put there at the bottom, it is a fraught subject because there's so many different angles with it, and there's still quite a bit of tension, I think. You know, we hear things about suppliers wanting to engage with intelligent clients, and on the flip side, clients are saying that their contract now aren't innovative enough, and it's difficult to do that if you are on short contract with small margins and so on. So there's so many things we need to unpick to really push this forward. So I guess our role in that is to help support our members and the wider FM profession move towards something that's going to help them do their job more effectively. So partnering with NEC and doing things like the contract pack that we're talking about today. It's a real step towards having this kind of industry accepted model that people on both sides of the fence and from all different aspects can kind of buy into. And that, you know, this sort of mirrors some of the work we're doing in other parts of the FM environment where we, you know, sort of common language and common approaches can really start trying to tackle some of the issues that I mentioned before. So that's all from me.
Okay, excellent. Our first question coming actually, we've jumped the gun. What does FM stand for?
Oh, facilities management. Sorry, yeah, it's not an obscure radio station. It's facilities management. That's a very broad term, but essentially what it covers are things, you know, I suppose put it into practical terms. If you walk into any office building in the world, you'll meet the front of house staff. You'll meet the building will be cleaned. There will be caterers, there'll be security, but there will also be people looking after the fabric of the building, a whole range of things, and that's all part of the facilities management universe, and lots more.
Okay, and BIFM itself?
The British Institute of Facilities Management, so the professional body that represents FM professionals. So we do a lot of work with the service supplier side of things, so we do have a lot of those members and also client side as well. So those in-house practitioners, about 15,500 members across the UK and a little bit overseas as well now. So
okay, excellent. Any idea of the sort of size of the sector, if you like, the sort of value?
Yeah, it's a number that we're trying very hard to nail down. It's quite a loose one, but we're talking in the region in terms of the facility services industry, somewhere in the region of 110 billion pounds in the UK in terms of contribution to GDP. And there are, again, with employment, there's a 250,000-ish facilities managers, if you like, people in the building managing this process. But when you start looking at the cleaning industry, security industry, and so on, we're talking in the region of 10% of the working population that are involved in facility services. So it's a huge myriad of stuff, and it is still evolving. We've only been around in one form or another for 20 years or so. The profession itself is not too much older, and there's still a lot of development still happening. So it's quite an exciting sector as well.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so against that backdrop, I was just going to do a brief introduction on NEC itself. So, what is NEC? Well, NEC is basically a brand name. The very original version of this form of contract is called the New Engineering Contract. Over time, that's changed, and the brand now is basically just NEC. It's a meaningless acronym. And usually you'll see that the letter 3, sorry, the number 3 after NEC, it signifies a third generation launch of this particular suite of documents. So NEC is actually a compilation of contracts, governance notes, and flowcharts. They're basically a modern day family of contracts, and their purpose twofold really. First and foremost, with any contract, I suppose, is to define legal relationships: who does what, when, where, how, and what happens if that doesn't occur. The most important for us, I think, with NEC contracts and the differentiator is that they are about facilitating sound project management principles and practices. So any sort of drafting body of any contract has a dilemma. How much time and effort do you put into the sort of normal T's and C's, the sort of roles and responsibilities, versus getting the parties to actually behave in a way which is synonymous with good project management? So NEC is basically a brand name for a suite of documents, and within the contracts themselves, within the box set, you can buy goods, works, or services. So beyond just FM, it can be used for a multitude of purposes. However, the focus today is the relationship of NEC in the FM marketplace. So if I just quickly show this slide, which is an introduction to the NEC family of contracts themselves, and if we look along the bottom screen, we'll see in any typical sort of project, you have a business case, somebody writes a business case, somebody may undertake some design, somebody may build this thing, and one day a client will operate it, that particular asset. Most of FM's work is primarily the right-hand side of this matrix in the operations side. Certain projects are very complicated, some are very straightforward. So very quickly, I thought I'd just run through what the NEC contracts are and when might they actually be used for FM. And the first one I've picked up there is the Professional Services Contract, otherwise known as the PSC. And you may well use this in FM to procure some professional services. People to write reports, people to undertake design, people to produce something of strategic importance to a particular client. You might use the PSC where the particular project itself is quite complicated, so where you need a sophisticated level of management. So you could use the PSC for procuring, consultants, basically, perhaps to write reports, that sort of thing. The Professional Services Short Contract, you'll see a pattern emerging with NEC contracts. There are, if you like, the main contract and the short version of the same. So underneath the Professional Services Contract, we can see the Professional Services Short Contracts, used for procuring, again, services, but this time, those which are low risk and straightforward. So if an FM, if a client wanted to procure some FM advice, then, and the advice itself was fairly straightforward, simplistic, then you might choose to use the Professional Services Short Contracts. There perhaps there is a large piece of maintenance or upgrade works, then probably the most common NEC contract used in the marketplace is the Engineering and Construction Contract, otherwise known as the ECC. So this is sort of contract at the moment used for lots of Crossrail, but could also be used for alterations, refurbishment, that sort of thing. Beneath that one, the engineering and construction subcontract, so any main contractor placed on the ECC can basically procure a subcontractor on essentially a back-to-back basis. Where you wanted perhaps an alteration or refurbishment works, but those works themselves were of a low risk and straightforward nature, so fairly simplistic, and it was, let's say, a one-off project, then there is an engineering and construction short contract, otherwise known as the ECSC. Lots of acronyms for you today, so apologies for that. And ducked out underneath that one, coming out to on the screen, is the engineering and construction short subcontract. So a very main contractor appointed under an ECSC can appoint a subcontractor on essentially back-to-back terms. It's not critical. The NEC doesn't demand you use NEC forms of contract further down the supply chain, but of course it makes absolute sense. Why wouldn't you want all of your supply chain pulling in roughly the same direction? The two contracts you would most likely find being used in the world of FM, the first one is the term service contract, otherwise known as the TSC. So this is generally used at the sort of operational stage of the life of an asset, and is for a fixed period of time. So you would use this where the FM services to be procured from a contractor are other than low risk and straightforward, i.e. perhaps they're fairly complicated, they're tricky, and they need a sophisticated degree of management to successfully carry them out. Again, beneath that one is the term service short contract, used for low risk and straightforward term services, so where you want to procure an FM contractor perhaps for external landscaping, cleaning windows, those sorts of things, something which in itself is fairly straightforward. You generally will need a contract for anything that you procure. The NEC family should be used for those contracts where they need a degree of professional management. So if you want to buy half a dozen ballpoint pens from a local, stationery, then don't use NEC contracts. But where they need to be professionally managed, then do think about using a correct form of contract appropriate to the procurement in hand. A client may well need to procure goods, works or services using a framework contract, and using an NEC framework contract that permits that to happen in conjunction with any or all of the contracts that are above that bar that you see on the screen. One more contract is the procurement of an adjudicator, perhaps where there is a dispute between two parties in an NEC contract, and the dispute itself perhaps falls within the definition of a construction contract for the Housing Grants Construction Regeneration Act in the UK, then you may need to call upon the adjudicator. You can do that from the adjudicator's contract. If that particular act does not apply, i.e. parts of the UK and outside of the UK, then adjudication is still the first port of call to formally resolve any disputes. Hopefully, most people using NEC contracts don't actually formalise disputes, but with this one, just in case. Was that a right smile there, John? It was. The supply contract. Finally, final two contracts in the family is a supply contract and a supply short contract. So if a client in FM wishes to procure, that's what, escalators, lifts, some sort of large sort of commodities in themselves, which are quite complicated, perhaps, then you might use a supply contract to procure such goods. Where such goods are fairly low risk and straightforward, not quite off the shelf necessarily, maybe need a bit of management, a bit of thinking about, but are fairly simplistic, then one might use the supply short contract. So we have a myriad of contracts within the NEC family. The two probably most commonly used in FM will be the TSC or TSSC, but hopefully I've demonstrated there's lots of other contracts we use for procurement and many other things. So where are these contracts used? Well, we of course, probably like any drafting body, have difficulty in tracking the full extent of the use. Nobody's actually obliged to tell us when, where, how, or why they're using it. Often you find out sort of active event that somebody's used an NEC form of contract. But what we do know is that it is used in at least 30 countries. Some are quite prolific, for example, the UK, South Africa, New Zealand. Some are very occasional, such as Antarctica. we find probably on balance, certainly in the UK, these used more in the public sector than the private sector. I say probably because, again, it's difficult to prove or disprove. Getting these facts are notoriously difficult. And the sort of sectors that these contracts are commonly used are FM and asset management, construction, engineering, oil and gas, petrochem, building. In fact, vast majority of the sectors that involve that sort of asset creation, management or replacement. And certainly the NEC contracts can be used and are used from, if you like, cradle to grave on all stages of an asset, from concept inception stages all the way through design, construction, operation, and ultimately demolition. There are some endorsements. The Crown Commercial Service gave a glowing endorsement recently that an obvious statement of using the term service contract for their new FM model contract. I think they use it in the previous version, but I think you could use that or the GC Works contract as a choice. This time they've rationalised they're only going to use the term service contract and then the FM model contract. And of course they're welcoming NEC for FM, the initiative between BIFM and ourselves. And to help users, what we are both trying to do is to help users create some fantastic outcomes, some great tender documents, some great value for clients, happy industry. That's really what it's all about. The Facilities Management Board also recognised that NEC term service contracts support good practice in FM procurement in the public sector. So some good pointers as to the direction of the public sector in respect of FM and which contracts they will be using or expect to be used. Okay, if I can hand over now to John Bowen, who will take us through the FM procurement good practice guide.
Good morning, everybody. The procurement guide, if I just sort of start off by setting the background, BIFM has a number of special interest groups, one of which is dealing with procurement. You don't need, if you're a member of BIFM, you don't need to be a procurement specialist to join us. You can just opt to join and receive information. We'd very much like it if you can participate, but if you just want to be up to date in things that are happening within the FM world, just log into your membership account and you can tick the box to receive emails. But if I could just put in a little reminder, when you're doing that, can you please check your email address so it's all in the right place, please. So the special interest group, we produced the first good practice guide to FM procurement about 7 or 8 years ago. And it was a very high-level document at the time. It was one of a suite that's available for members free through the BIFM website. And what we wanted to try and do with the 2014 edition, its predecessor was a very high-level document. And within that, we looked at it from a very strategic view of buying FM. Feedback that we had from people who used it was that they really wanted something that was a bit more basic. We recognised that we have a huge spectrum of roles within facilities management. And you may be an FM running 30 odd sites around the country or something of that nature, a really big estate, but then you could also be somebody running a building of 50 people, and you not only do the strategy and such, but you also clean the toilets. But that's the sort of scope that we have within the membership, and the view was that if we could come up with something that reflected good practice in buying things, and we all buy it, whatever size or scope of role that you have within that, you buy something at some point in time. You're buying consumables, those types of things. You're maybe hiring contractors, going through to the really big contracts, and maybe some of you are involved in PFI schemes and those sorts of things with the 35-year deals. But you're all buying somewhere along the line. So what we try to do is kick off good practice. And looking at providing something that works for people who do their own buying, works for people who have to work with in-house buying teams. So whatever you're up to, you've got something. And to do it in a format which it's an A5 size booklet if you've seen it. You can have it as a PDF document on your PDA or tablet and use it for quick referral. If you want an in-depth guide to buying then there are lots of good procurement books out there that you can buy, but this is something which is light, quick and easy reference. Some basic principles within good practice. I'll go through this in detail in sequence, but starting with separation of powers, you need a business case, you need a specification, you're going to go out to tender, you will be contracting for goods and services, you'll be managing those contracts, and you're going to have to close the contracts down at some point, possibly rolling them over to a new supplier or extending, but there needs to be a formal closing of one contract and an opening of another. So let's look at those in order. Separation of powers. Why do we need to separate it? It can be quite difficult, especially if you're in a small organisation. But good governance dictates that the person who specifies the need, or who needs to consume the product or the service, should not be the person placing the contract, and they should not be the person paying the invoice. There should be three distinct functions involved. It's a good protection for you, and I can vouch for that myself, because there are times when things come back from 4 or 5 years ago and you get a legal problem when something's alleged over it. If you've got that type of process in place where there is a clear separation of the powers in placing a contract, then you're doing the right thing. Moving on to the business case, it needs to be as concise as possible. If you can put a business case together in 2 sides of A4, that's about right. If you get it onto one side, that's brilliant, but 2 sides is probably going to be the ideal. It should set out what it is you want, why you want it, when you want it, how you're going to get it, who's going to deal with placing the contract and running it, where the funding is going to come from. Is it capital, is it revenue, whose budget is it coming out of? And it should cover the options that you're looking at. There should always be, in any case that you put forward, an option to do nothing. If we keep the status quo, what will happen? That can be quantified, and then you could compare that with doing something better. That's when you start to find where the savings are and the improvements are. Specification, it can be input, it can be output. Input specifications are very tight. They define exactly what you want the supplier to do and how you want them to do it in most cases. An output specification sets out what you want to achieve, and it allows the supplier much more freedom to come up with innovative ideas. It can be more difficult to compare the results you get back from an output specification, because people are coming back with different ideas perhaps, and sometimes that puts people off. It shouldn't. It allows innovation, and I would always recommend that you try and go for the output specification if you can. In either case, give as much information as possible. Be very clear about what you want, why you want it, what you're trying to achieve with it, because it helps the suppliers come back with the right solutions. Inviting tenders, you need to include a specification. You need to include your terms and conditions of trading. You need to tell them when they want to tender back, and how it's got to come back. Is it online, is it in paper format, whatever. You need to tell them about the details of the contract. You should also be telling them around that how you're going to adjudicate the contract. You should be clear with people about how you're going to judge them. Again, so that they can come back with the right answers. The less ambiguity there is around the tender process, the better deal you're going to get. And we all have to work to tight deadlines. So the more you've got in the invitation to tender that's clear, the more likelihood that you're going to get it back on time without having to deal with lots of queries, without having to worry about extending the contract, the tender period. Placing the contract, you've told everybody how you want it adjudicated. You need to be in a position where you can get that adjudication process done, announce your results, notify the people who are unsuccessful, and get the contract mobilised. The guide covers these sort of areas in some detail to help you along with that process. But again, working to tight deadlines, being fair to yourselves, being fair to the people that you're dealing with, get that stage right, and it sets the contract up nicely. because you're going to have to manage it. You're going to have to get the contract mobilised. You'll need to set up contract management. Contract management should be on at least on two levels. You should have a strategic level and a tactical level. What we try and put in the guide for you is to show that at a strategic level, you're possibly meeting monthly, quarterly, and you're talking about the future. You're talking about where the contract's going. You shouldn't be bringing problems to a strategic meeting. All of the problems should be dealt with at a tactical level in a timely manner by the people at the front line. They should be sorting those sorts of things out. The last thing you want to be doing with a strategic meeting is getting together and talking about, well, the trains were blocked 3 months ago and nothing happened. It's history. Should have been dealt with. Keep one level strategic, moving things forward so the client and the supplier are working together to make the contract work and deliver benefits. Keep the tactical stuff at that level. Closing a contract down, one of the things we put in the guide is when you're placing a contract, one of the things you need to be saying up front is how the contract will be terminated. That's not around terminating the contract in terms of dissatisfaction. It's about how the contract will end. And if the contract moves to a different supplier, or if it's a contract for a one-off product or service, how does it finish? It needs to cover things like handover of documentation. It possibly needs demobilisation if you've got major works on site, getting the scaffolding down, clearing the waste away, restoring the site to original condition, those sorts of things. It's important to close the contract properly and have a defined way of doing it. Chris mentioned at the beginning about some of the tensions and some of the issues. Put a little quote in there, it's a bit apocryphal, but we often say that the end user will buy the right thing, but very badly. And a professional buyer will buy the wrong thing, but they'll buy it ever so well. Like all apocryphal stories, there's an element of truth in it. But the problem that comes from that is where the people specifying the goods, who require the goods, and the buyer aren't on the same playing field. They're not talking to each other, not working with a team together. And what we're trying to do with the guide is to show you that it doesn't matter which side of the thing is, you shouldn't actually be taking sides. If you work for an organisation, you're supposed to be working together. You're part of the same team, you're part of trying to deliver the same objectives. It's not a battle between yourselves. It shouldn't be a power struggle. Really getting the best out of procurement, doing it well, is around different groups of people bringing different specialisms to the party. So as an end user, if you've got a professional buyer working with you, should be working together, you should be using each other's skills to get the best result for your organisation. Why use a standard form of contract? I mentioned ambiguity. I've been buying, I started my first buying job, which came up with FM in 1972, which is possibly before a lot of you were born. So I've been at it a long time. And one of the things that really keeps lawyers in Bentleys and Rolls Royces and Aston Martins is contracts that aren't worded very well. If you can get a contract which everybody understands, which the industry understands, which everybody is using, then it makes things work. You get that clarity around things using NEC 3, form, whatever. You know what you're doing, the suppliers know what they're doing, you can work with that. And it's very, very important with these forms of contracts that you don't introduce too many amendments. Possibly you might need to bring in 2 or 3 things that you're going to add to a contract, or maybe you want to take a couple of clauses out of the contract. But limit that. When you start to see things where, if you're on the supply side, for example, you get a tender comes in, NEC forms, whichever one you're using, and then there's a whole list of 10, 15, 20 changes, different clauses. It starts to negate the benefit, it clouds the issue. So if we're going to use standard forms, one of the things we're trying to do with this from the point of view of the Institute is to get a standard platform out there, to get some standards in the industry that we're all using. And if we can move forward on that basis, then it's going to be a great help. So I think that sums it up for me, Bob.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks so much indeed. I take it you haven't done Aston Martin or a Bentley or...
No, I've started the Jaguar actually.
Okay. So what's your first car? You told me Vauxhall Viva or something like that. So could have been a lawyer, should have been a lawyer, unfortunately. Just a couple of other points on that, a couple of questions I've got. You mentioned the importance of business case, a bit of a hobby horse of mine. Rarely, if ever, do I see a business case that stacks up. I mean, how frequent do you think they are in the FM industry to actually get high quality, clear business cases that make absolute sense?
I think one of the issues for me is that you don't see them often enough. I've been in situations where I've worked with clients who have had a business case which basically says, I've got a budget. And I've got a budget for £80,000 to do that.
So I need to spend it.
So why? What options have you looked at? What other things could you do? And over the years, we've saved millions for various organisations and clients because we've been able to say, well, if that's what you want to do, here are different ways you can do it. If you do start off from the basis of, if we don't do anything, this is what's going to happen. This is the way costs are going to go on. Possibly the costs are going to increase. So you say, okay, well, if we do something different, we spend this amount of money now, the savings plug in like this. So in 5 years' time, 8 years' time, this option gives you one level. The next option gives you that level. You may not necessarily want to go for the cheapest option every time. It may well be that the cheapest option, there are certain other benefits strategically, maybe with the marketing platform, the way you want to go, but the cheapest option isn't the right one. Yeah. But if you set it all out in a case, that here are those options, this is what we've looked at, then you're going to come up with the best solution. And I think the other thing possibly with business cases where people do fall down is that there isn't the necessary consultation and sign-off around the organisation. So possibly if you're going to be doing something different, if it's around, say, the fabric of the building, have you talked to your marketing colleagues? What about brand image and those sorts of things? What are the IT people doing? Is the organisation going to grow, contract? How do you want to move? You get the various different functions within the organisation involved, and you come up with a solution that you can show from the options supports that organisation's strategy, supports the goals that they want to achieve. And that's what the business case should be all about.
Yeah, it strikes me that if you have something which is a high quality business case, and if you were transparent with it and shared it around, not only internally but externally, it's a great way of it properly engaging the supply chain. You actually might be able to help put you on the right path before you press the button and go down the wrong sort of route. But wrong route. We don't seem to believe in how useful such a document may be that shapes our thoughts. I mean, but just moving on to that, if you like tender documents, I would do lots of tender documents, and if I'm honest, most of them are extremely poor. I'll give you a different word, but not very good at all. Yeah. How do we get better with that? How do we actually take that part seriously? How do we stop the mentality of, let's just get a contract, let's just do something, and then once that something is executed, we'll sort it out after?
I think often time pressures play a part. We have that situation where somebody says we need it by X, and a date is set in stone. So what you then find is, instead of somebody looking at it and thinking, well, okay, we actually need X plus 2 months. And if we've got X plus 2 months, we can do the job. We can do the right thing.
It's a bit of honesty. Honesty and realism.
Yeah. So to get that, but I think you're right. One of the frustrations I have, I've been very fortunate in my career that I've worked on the client and the supply side and back and forth between the two roles. One of the frustrations, particularly from the supply side, is that clients often see the supply base as something like a load of guys in horn helmets and shaggy coats coming ashore in the longboat waving axes. It's the enemy.
It still happens in Birmingham.
Well, yeah. I smell it anyway.
that comes from the top, though, I think, and there's an element. I mean, I don't think there's a problem specific with business cases in FM. I just think generally, the business cases seems to be lost, and I think where you do see it, and where you do see procurement professionals and FM professionals and everyone working together, is when you've got a business leader right at the very top that is showing where we're all heading, and that permeates right down, so that any business case is linked to that vision, and say, this is part of us. And Unilever are a great example. They've set the stall out, and I'm sure internally they've done everything right, so that everyone gets what they're doing, and it might be cost saving, but even so, that is linked to this is pushing us forward. It's making the boat go faster. This is what it's all about.
Okay, brilliant. Let me do my part. I've got a number of questions mounting on. I'll do mine. Just one or two quickly. We can't hear anything. Hopefully you can now. That's from Macroft. Jersey Barry, the music is a bit intense and dark in places. I'll take that as the start-up music. We'll try and soften that for the next time round. Some of the others. Any idea why the public sector used the suite more than the private sector? That was just my opinion. That's probably the case. I can't actually produce any hard evidence to support that. Maybe what we have, all the government tries to act as a single-headed client. Of course, they're multi-headed. They actually, they can talk to each other and do talk to each other. And hopefully they'll say, this is a good thing, you could use it. Of course, in 2005, there was what was then an NPC endorsement to use NEC contracts in the public sector, and that can't do anything but help. But in the private sector, most of these organisations are in some sort of competition, so there's no pull. They don't, they're not going to talk to each other and share good practice necessarily, whereas they should be in the public sector. So I don't know what you think.
I think there's an element of accountability there as well. These contracts, they could be quite often are multi-million-pound contracts. So being able to say that they don't just create these things themselves and they work with neutral third-party people, it helps that. And maybe in the private sector, if things don't go so well or things aren't as efficient or as tight as they should be, then we don't really tend to find out about that thing. That's, for me, the public sector taking that approach should be leading the way, because it's not just about accountability and being able to fall back on something. It's just better business. It's just a better way of doing things.
Very sensible, yeah.
I think another thing is that within the public sector, you have the public regulations. So you have a very structured way of applying. Standard forms plug very nicely into that as an addition. Whereas in the private sector, it does tend to be maybe a little bit more fleet of foot. And because you don't have the structure out there, it's an issue. But the legislation, there are all sorts of issues. You can walk into minefields and spend a lot of money sorting them out. Whereas having a standard contract form does help to negate the risk of that. I mean, it's about risk management.
Yeah, I try and persuade people to spend more time and effort, actually forming this quite brilliantly clear brief. Like, what do you want the contractors to do for you? But forget the terms and conditions. Just use the unamended standard form. Just bank those. Use them as is. Now focus on exactly what you want. And the more crystal clear you can write that, the better shape everybody will be in.
Yeah, certainly from the heavier end of FM, the high-end civil engineering end of FM, you've got people who've come through professional disciplines where standard forms are a way of life, maybe. But for a lot of FMs, like myself, I came into it mid-career, changed a career, and started running FM. So you've got people who come in and are not used to those sorts of things, don't know where to start, and they're maybe growing up with a culture of not using the forms as much as maybe other people would have done.
Yeah.
But certainly other functions that I worked in over my career, standard documents of way of life.
Okay, so between us, that sounds like a sort of different NEC thing. You think about the guy who hasn't necessarily gone through contracts, just fell into this sort of role rather than sort of matured into it. So that's something to take away. But if I just spend 5 or 10 minutes on these few slides, and I can, or we can address the final questions. Okay, so in a rather quick introduction to the terms of contracts in terms of short contracts, I was going to look at the characteristics and objectives of those two forms of contract, when to use them, some typical arrangements of those contracts, the range of use, and finally just a few key features. So you know, very snappy stuff indeed. So these two forms of contract share the same characteristics of all other NEC contracts. I mentioned ECC, PSC, supply contracts, and all NEC contracts are about primarily trying to stimulate good management. So there's a big difference, in my opinion, between administering your contracts and managing contracts. And these contracts are trying to force us to manage contracts much better than we've done in the past. And management primarily is about sort of making decisions, making good, you know, fairly quick, high quality decisions. They're very flexible, so they can be used in a wide variety of commercial situations, for a wide variety of types of work, and any location. And I found what the beauty of NEC contracts are, is that they actually don't favour the employer nor the contractor. They favour the project. They favour whatever it is that the client wishes to procure. So whatever FM services there are, if there is an issue or problem, then both parties are forced really to put their efforts into solving the problem in the interest of the project. So it isn't about surrounding yourself and, you know, and the other party's expense. And finally, hopefully, when you get the chance to read these, review them, and use them in anger, that you will appreciate they're clear and simple documents, actually written by and large in plain English. They are, you know, devoid of sort of legalese. I think these silly words notwithstanding the aforementioned for the sake of clarity and all that sort of stuff. It's gone. You know, people want to read the documents and instantly, you know, get to grips with, you know, what they're trying to tell us to do. So they use a language and structure which are pretty straightforward and easily understood. And what I've spotted is people actually responding positively to the sort of plain English approach. And what I'm hearing a lot of that is plain English. Let's get rid of subjectivity. Let's use objectivity. Let's create something which is helpful, which is clear. People will often hide behind subjectivity, and that's you know, not a good place to be. So in terms of the range of use, I'm struggling to think of where you can't use the term service contract, term service short contract in an FM model, other than the minutiae sort of, you know, purchase, which is not geared up to some sort of professional purchase. So bear in mind, of course, that you're providing a service, it isn't a project. That said, within the provision of a service, through both forms of contract, there is provision for task orders. So you could essentially have many projects within a term contract. However, it is primarily about maintaining the existing condition of an asset, not really improving it or changing it dramatically. Can include some betterments, may include renewal and replacements. But if you want, you know, a new building, shall we say, then these aren't the contracts for you. There's a different form. So understand what it is that you're looking to acquire, to purchase, to procure, and pick the contract that best suits that scenario. When would you use term service contract as opposed to term service short contract is all about risk, really. I mentioned earlier risk and complexity, where there is a particular set of FM services which are in themselves are inherently risky, then you can draw to using the term service contract. Where those FM services are fairly low risk and straightforward, then you'll draw to using the term service short contract. Sometimes people start off with the term service short contract but want to add some of the features in the TSC. Why bother? You may as well use TSC in the first place. So a typical term service contract arrangement would see the employer, somebody called the employer, the client if you like, client organisation engaging somebody called the contractor, the two central focuses there, using the term service contract. In turn, most contractors these days actually outsource, you know, subcontract, subconsult, many other services to subcontractors or suppliers. And there's a variety of NEC contracts that can be used for that. Hopefully, there is no duplication, no dispute, so you can use the duplicated contract. If there was one, then there's a contract for that. And to the left-hand side, as you look, the employer may perhaps need some design services. Maybe within the FM services, something has to be designed, so the employer has to procure an external organisation, in which case you could use the PSC or the PSSC, but the main role to focus on really from an FM perspective is the service manager, you know, the FM guy, I think he's called. You may use, or the client may use, the professional services contract or the professional services short contract to acquire such services. But the main role of the service manager is to manage the contract on behalf of the employer. And effectively, they are sort of two-headed animals. Part of their role is to act as agents of the employer. So when the employer perhaps requires some additional services, the service manager must implement that through service manager instruction. However, their primary role is in terms of things like payment and assessing change, which in this contract is called conversation events. And when it comes to both assessing conversation events and determining how much the contractor is due to be paid each month, then they are there to really effectively act as an independent certifier. They are there to hold the balance between the parties. They can favour neither the employer nor the contractor. So it's quite a unique and sort of special role of actually managing a contract between two parties, albeit you're probably paid only by one of those two parties. So in the FM sort of sector, hopefully people will aspire to act in that role, and perhaps they need to get their heads around what actually that entails. It is quite challenging, particularly if you find you're a service manager from the same organisation who is actually the employer. You somehow need to distance yourselves and make decisions which could actually potentially be contrary to the employer's sort of best financial interests, of course. So that's a typical term service contract arrangement. And the term service short contract is that bit more simplified. Maybe there's no design services now. Because you're using short contracts, maybe your pool of NEC contracts is shorter because you're only using short contracts from elsewhere in the suite. Maybe the employer is confident of being able to act in the role of the service manager in the previous slide I talked about, and therefore they don't need what is called in this contract an employer's agent, so they could undertake that role themselves. If they do undertake the role themselves, they will still need to act as that basically independent certifier when it comes to deciding how much money the contractor is due for payment each month. So it could be more simplified, unless perhaps the employer doesn't believe he has a capability or capacity to undertake that contract management role, and he can outsource that. If it's outsourced, he would appoint somebody called an employer's agent, and if it is an external appointment, then you might use the professional services short contract to achieve that. But you know, the relationship could be very much small. In fact, on many a term service short contract, there could be just somebody called the employer who buys somebody called the contractor. The contractor does not subcontract. There's no adjudication, there's no employer's agent, and there are literally just those two parties carrying out that particular contract. So a couple of key features of the term service contract and service short contract. The TSC is modular. By that, it's essentially like a pick and mix contract. The contract itself, you build up the contract at the outset at tender stage, where you are presented with some choices, which payment mechanism you want, which is called the main option, which secondary options you want, which cover things like KPIs and low performance damages and things like that. So you actually, for each particular project, pick which T's and C's you want from the term service contract in the first place. Term service short contract, on the other hand, is not so modular. The drafters took the TSC and stripped out complicated bits, therefore lending itself a low risk and straightforward services. Both contracts have a requirement for the parties to act as stated in the contracts, and of course with mutual trust and cooperation, which is an interesting concept, perhaps challenging in the UK because we don't have good faith as part of our jurisdiction, but one day hopefully maybe. Both contracts demand no verbal communication, so in the TSC all communications must be informed to be read, copied and recorded. All communications in the term service short contracts must be in writing. So no verbal instructions, no confirmation of verbal instructions. Lots of problems I've seen in the past are about a memory test. You said something to me some time ago. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. And a dispute occurs. So again, let's keep the theme of transparency. But we've got to put your communication in a form that can be read, copied and recorded. I always say the jewel in the crown with NEC contracts are the early warning process. There's a reciprocal obligation from both the client side, the employer side, and the contractor side. As soon as they're aware of anything that could affect, in my language, sort of time cost equality, you have an obligation to tell the party, and you then, if you so agree, call what's called a risk reduction meeting and set out to tackle the problems, to put the problem on the desk, spin around a little bit, and come up with ways in which you can solve the problems in front of you. So a really outstanding way to help us become that bit more efficient. There's contractor's plan regarding term service contracts. The employer will tell the contractor what services he requires through a document called the service information. That's what he wants. How the contractor plans to do it should be articulated in his plan. This is something I found in FM contracts, something different. Often you don't get a similar document from FM contractors. So again, what's the problem? What is the big secret here? Tell me what we're going to do, in what order, with what resource. If it's a problem, I'd rather find out through your plan in advance of it than at the time. So it's a good complementary document that helps shape a successful project. On term service short contracts, it isn't a mandatory requirement to provide a plan unless it is expressed so in service information. But to be honest, I can think of hardly any project ever that wouldn't have benefited from some sort of basic plan from the contractor. In terms of payment, there's some choice in the term service contract. 3 choices. You can choose from lump sum, target cost, or cash reimbursable. There's only effectively 2 choices in the term service short contract, that is lump sum and or schedule of rates type approach. Both contracts have provision for compensation events. Essentially, those matters or items that are in the contract recorded to be the employer's risk. So if one of these compensation event matters occur, the contractor may be compensated through further monies for that sort of eventuality. Effectively, it's a change management process. So there's some of the key features of the term service contract and term service short contracts. Questions and discussions then. Where did I get on here? So Michael Booman. We're looking at our repairs and maintenance contract, and I'll be deciding whether to use an NHF bespoke contract or an NEC term service contract. It's a schedule of rates contract. What are the benefits of going with the NEC term service contract? Hopefully I've just expressed that in running through the TSE and TSFC. I'm not personally that familiar with an NHF. I mean, a bespoke contract worries me. Anything bespoke contracts worry me. How much does it cost to make it bespoke? How many lawyers are going to look over it from the supply chain to make sure that T's and C's are acceptable?
Bespoke contracts always take time to put together. They've got to be checked, tested. You can quite often find that once you start to use them, you've missed something or you worded something in a way that you wish you'd done differently. Having a tried and tested document such as the NEC suite available helps you a lot. And one of the other things is picking up on the point, Rob, about the contractor's plan. The sorts of things that will come through from that will allow an FM to be looking and thinking, that can't happen that week because such and such is going on. Or it gives you the chance to think about those things. So what you've got within the NEC suite is a ready to run, just plug and play document. If you're going to go down the bespoke route, then
all sorts of risks.
Yeah, it's risk.
Yeah, it may be plug and play. You still need to take great care, and care is in writing the service information, the brief.
Yes. But you've got a huge chunk that's ready to go.
Yeah.
I suppose the temptation with going down the bespoke route is just kind of, no one's the same as us, and we need it, and
everybody's unique.
Everybody's unique indeed, and I can see with it, but it does come. The brief is unique. What you're trying to achieve will be. But how do you deal with disputes? If it's a bespoke contract, or how do you manage that contract from both sides of it if it's bespoke? Because all their other clients will have a different way of approaching it. So suddenly that takes a lot more time and effort and energy. And so yeah.
I personally, and this is my opinion, I'd rather spend energy your sort of avoiding disputes than resolving disputes. And what about have the discussions before anything's done? Let's thrash things out what we want and let's express that in a clear, coherent manner. Let's not do it in the course of law. The only beneficiaries can be those driving input from that process. So we need to be avoiding disputes, writing high quality tender documents, and helping our people become extremely competent and help develop their skills for decision making and writing tender documents and writing brilliant business cases and all those sorts of things. Okay, so that's a sort of lecture over that. Does the NEC contract take account of forthcoming changes to EU procurement regulations coming into force from 1st of January 2015? So I can't think of any EU procurement regulation coming out that will be hinged upon the contracts. I mean, one of the things with the contracts themselves is they're drafted to be sort of what was the word? You know, not for use in the UK, but only in public sector work. In EU work, they're of neutral sector and neutral jurisdiction applicability. So the idea is most countries can pick them up and plug and play, and they shouldn't fall foul of the local law. So I can't think.
No, I can't think of anything that will impinge on regulations at all. No.
Okay, flashing through these. What are usually included in the facilities in FM? What are usually included in the facilities in FM? What does the question mean? Let alone the answer. What are we saying?
We think about things like building maintenance.
So typical things that might be included within FM.
Good grief.
Well, literally, think about your own house almost, isn't it? It's the same sort of analogy on a smaller scale. Everything needed to upkeep an asset is FM, isn't it?
You're maintaining the shell of the building. You're maintaining all the internal workings of the building. That's the sort of thing we talk about as hardware. That's about the mechanical. It's the structure. Then reception, the post room, guarding, running the conference rooms, cleaning them, painting. There's a sort of core that most FMs will do. But then you start to get outside of that. Some FMs maybe do a bit of procurement, and maybe do a bit of fleet management, a bit of IT. We've even seen FMs doing HR in some cases, or elements of HR. So it's a big profession.
It is, and no two jobs are the same in a sense, which again gets us back to the space. But I was talking to a member of ours who's responsible for works for the Greater London Authority, so responsible for managing City Hall, which is a great job, really interesting things. But he had to. We're hoping to meet next week. He had to dash off because he's also responsible for putting the lights on the Trafalgar Square Christmas tree. So a lot of things fall into it, which is why I guess having something to standardise might help on that front, and that you don't have to keep thinking about because it is so unique and it is so modular in a sense of it, and it can change overnight. Suddenly you're responsible for something that you weren't responsible for a month ago. Yeah, but it kind of loosely fits. So
Okay, perhaps do one more question. There's quite a few questions we've got here, and no, we don't really quite plan for what we'll do with these, but my promise is that we'll answer them somehow and feed back all the answers to all the questions we didn't get through in the session. So we just pick on one more. The government construction strategy talks about using government soft landings to smooth the transition between capital construction and asset operation, e.g. using BIM. Has any work been done by NEC to marry ETC terms with TSC terms to embrace these concepts? Okay, that's an interesting question. I have sat personally on the government soft landings sort of working group at stage, and at the time, nothing really came out of soft landings that would cause a change in the terms and conditions of the NEC contracts, but a great deal emerged in terms of how to write works information in ETC or service information in the TSC, and about how really we need to engage with the right people at the right time. In fact, government soft landings in itself, having personally spent quite a bit of time in the water industry, which you see the sort of the assets of owner and operator talking to each other about prior to a capital project, you wonder why on earth this never happened. So it's a strange concept to me that there's a disconnect between the guy who builds and the guy who operates. However, it is obviously a problem and we need to do something about it. I'm not convinced in my own mind that it's about terms and conditions again. I think it's about how you set up a contract in the first place, the strategy of it. I think it's about how you write things into the works information and service information that lends for that smooth handover. Okay, planning for it, executing it, and all the rest of it is of course absolutely clear. Sorry, so that was just my statement, wasn't it? But I need to conclude things. I don't know, about 1 or so minutes before we will switch off. Just a note. that there is a BIFM NEC users group, and this is free to join for BIFM members. So Christmas is coming, so fill your boots and make sure you get the most out of that membership if you possibly can. You can have a look at therefore as a BIFM member at the term service contract and the term service short contract itself. So please have a look at those. There's some free e-learning with some introduction to this term service contract, and there is a regular newsletter. There's also discounts to be had on further NEC products and services. So all you need to do is email bifm@neccontract.com, quoting your membership number, and more information on that can be found at that website that's there. BIFM members also get 10% discount on the NEC BIFM suite of contracts. You need to quote that thing, don't make any spelling mistakes, please. And that's the web address as to how to purchase a particular product. So if you think about it, even if maybe you're not quite ready for it, NEC, or something maybe you're going to mature into it, just have a look, go have a look. It's free to join, free to review. Please, go and have a look at that particular contract and see about the good fit with your business. So all I want to do in closing remarks is just turn to 2 o'clock. Is to thank really John and Chris for their efforts today. That was absolutely brilliant, and I hope you've all enjoyed this 1-hour session. If you've got some other ideas of future events you'd like to see, perhaps even just from BIFM or from NEC or together, then please do let us know. And as I mentioned before, I promise we will pick up all the other questions and share the answers with you, as well as sending this link out, which you'll be able to look at later in the day. Thank you very much indeed. Enjoy the rest of your days. Goodbye.